Yeah. I'd like you to join me in thank you again for coming to our first birthday party for Mine in the Gap. I'd like to welcome to the stage the director, cinematographer, editor, producer, Bing Liu, and star. Producer of Mine in the Gap, Gap QnA. And the executive producer and your moderator for the evening, Steve James. There is a spare chair. It's a party. It's like musical chairs. There's a spare chair because Josh Altman, Bing's co-editor, is in Chicago and is apparently making his way towards the music box and may or may not join us. So, it's a chair in his honor. But before we start, I'd love it if you join us in singing "Happy Birthday" to Mine in the Gap. So, can we do that? Can we start us off there? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear. Happy birthday to you. All right, this is how we do things at Cartoon Queen. Steve.
Hello.
Hello. I've never seen this tradition at Cartemplin before, but Cartemplin's got some films you could be celebrating their 40th and 50th anniversary or birthdays. Well, this is great. It's great to see all you out here tonight for this amazing film and this amazing journey that Bing and Diane have been on with the film. That started a year ago at Sundance. And I just want to start, I think that means the sky's the limit for this film. What got you into skateboarding?
I think I was in 6th or 7th grade, and I was sitting next to someone in my language arts class. I thought he was really cool because he would like draw. You do these really funny sketches of like, Teletubbies smoking weed and stuff. Oh, this guy's cool. And then he started bringing these finger skateboards, tech decks, to class, and we'd like just finger skate from the books. And then that led to just getting a skateboard for Christmas and falling in love with it.
So classes weren't going so well for you?
Not at that time, I guess.
And so that's seems like a rather innocent and sort of childlike interest or whatever in skateboarding. When did it become more than just something kind of fun for you to do? Because I assume at some point it did.
I think so. That winter when I got that first skateboard, I would just practice a lot in my basement. At that point, my mom had moved out of my stepfather's place because things were getting pretty bad. They stayed married, but that separation gave me a little bit of freedom, I guess. And then the new neighborhood that we lived in, I met these kids about a mile away who all happened to skate in this 1-2 block radius, and I would just skate there every day. And I think I found skateboarding to be a tool for escape in that way. And
describe the neighborhood you lived in.
I lived in several different neighborhoods, but that neighborhood that I started skateboarding in was on the east side. So Rockford is sort of like divided between east and west by the river that cuts it down the middle. And the further west you go, the more working class, the more families of color. And the further east you go, the more white, affluent. So when we first moved to Rockford, we were on the west side, and when my mom married my stepfather, we moved over to the east side. And then when my mom moved out of my stepfather's place, before moving back in with him, we moved further east. So, it was sort of a mix of elderly, retired people and working class families.
And so, flash forward now. What did you have a kind of epiphany when you first decided you wanted to make this film? I know that, and you've talked about this, I'm sure in a lot of interviews, about that your initial idea wasn't the film it became. But what was kind of the initial epiphany, if there was one, that made you want to even do this film to begin with?
I feel like as an adolescent, I was having a lot of conversations about, trauma in the home, what it meant to grow up. But it was always in private. And I felt like, why is no one talking about this openly? So I wanted to do a project that, perhaps would give people a reason to, or an opening to talk about it openly. So my original idea was to try to get, I guess, the hometown hero or the local influencer of the skate community all over America to talk about these things on camera. And so I went around the country and did that, Arizona, New York, and St. Louis, and Portland. So that was what I did for the first year. And then when I started working with QnA, it was this fellowship called Diverse Voices and Docs. And that was the first time I saw your films and other films that QnA does, which are more, character study, long-form verite. And at that time, QnA was part of this ensemble that I had built over that year. So I started following him because out of expediency, Rockford is a lot easier to get to than Portland. And then as I started following him, I bumped into Zach, and he, his girlfriend was 8 months pregnant, and I found it to be a trackable story worth following.
So you start with QnA, and QnA, correct me if I'm wrong, but QnA is unusual in the skate community. I mean, I know that skateboarding is becoming more diverse, right? But for a long time, it was a pretty white kind of endeavor. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, of the few black skateboarders I talked to around the country, they had all talked about, getting flack from their own communities, getting called white boy, getting beaten up for skateboarding, by their peers who are also black. So, it was an extra sort of barrier they had to face in latching onto the skate culture.
So what was it about QnA? Was it the fact that he was outside the mainstream of skate culture attractive to you, or were there other aspects about him that drew you to him?
Well, our first interview together, by the way, I didn't really know QnA. I shot this one archival clip of him, breaking a skateboard, but I was 18 and he was 11. He was just a kid at the park. Years later, when I went back to, look at archival footage after following QnA for a few years, I realized I had this clip. I could build other archival footage around it using other people's archival of him. But our first interview together, our first real one, was in his attic, and that's where he commiserated about crying after getting beaten. And I just saw an ability for him to emotionally process things openly and not dismiss, trauma and violence in the home. That reminded me of who I was when I was his age. I think most other people, including Zach, are very dismissive of those experiences and gotten to a point where they didn't want to process it. So that's what I latched onto.
And that's kind of amazing that that's the first interview. Because I remember when you were showing, and here's, who's this guy? I remember when you first were putting together a piece I saw, which wasn't at all a full film. That was a very prominent part of the piece, and I just remember being really struck by the intimacy that you had with him. It's kind of amazing that happened on the very first shoot. What's your secret?
I don't know. I feel like I played therapist for a lot of my friends over the years, and that was just an instance of that skill set maybe coming out to play. But it's a two-way street. Like I said, QnA is really open to processing, and it was just him needing to talk about it. He'd never talked about it.
And then how did Zach then come into the film for you?
Well, Zach I knew a little bit from my teenage years, but I only filmed with him a few times. I didn't really know him. When I bumped into him again, I was following QnA to this pool party, and that's the scene where Zach does a front flip into the pool, and that's was the first time I'd really bumped into him and his girlfriend at the same time. And I just did an on-the-fly interview with him, and he was like, both excited to be a dad, but obviously not prepared for it. But he was also down for me to just track that journey, you know. Like we planned something that day, you know, about going to the hospital to film him on the day of his son's birth, and he was down for it, and Nina was down for it too.
I'm going to get to you guys in just a second. I just want to, I mean, there's a million questions. I know you guys have questions too, so I promise not to completely bogart the situation here. You know, this is a very raw film and a very honest film, and I find, you know, and I think most everyone, if not everyone who sees it, finds it an incredibly empathic film. Did you, as this went along and as it became the film it is now, and this much more personal portraiture that also includes yourself, did you wrestle with any of the sort of ethical or implications of the story you were telling? Did you find yourself, did you torture yourself with all about that? Did you feel like you had clarity on that? You know, how did you cope with the difficulty of the subjects' lives that you're telling?
I mean, there were a lot of things that were difficult, but I think the one most difficult thing overall was when Nina told me that Zach was being abusive. You know, her telling me on camera is how I learned in real time. And I didn't know what to do. I was like, can I keep making this film? How do I keep making this film? You know, do I have to get outright permission from Zach as well to continue the film? You know, how much do I reveal? What is the safest way to keep going? You know, I mean, from that I took a 40-hour domestic violence course. I think that, because I couldn't really find any guidebook in other films I was watching to help me guide me through that process. But I know that, you know, at least I wanted to do it safely for Nina. And I think, I mean, ultimately that was one of the main drivers in putting myself in the film the way that I did. Sort of to put skin in the game, but also to show the process of the filmmaking so the audience can decide, you know, if what I did was ethical.
And was there a point, do you recall a point where you decided that you felt like you handled it and were proceeding in an ethical way, or was it, you know, you clearly were asking those questions and trying to cope with that and do things that would help you deal with it? Did you come to a point of realization that you can pinpoint with that?
No, I do remember that scene where I asked Nina in the car, you know, how do I move forward? Like, can I confront Zach or not? I remember showing it to Gordon Quinn in his office, and, you know, Gordon and I spent a lot of time in the edit room, just me showing him scenes or rough cuts. And that was a scene that he really latched onto. He was like, this is amazing, this is great, this is transparent, and, you know, I think I don't know what, I just feel like that, you know, that was a moment where I realized, okay, if I'm going to put myself in the film, you know, these sort of moments where I show my decision making as a filmmaker is the reason to do it, is one of the reasons to do it.
So Diane, when you first encountered this project, what was it that struck you most powerfully about it?
I think, you know, just seeing these young men express their feelings to Bing, and I just don't see that very often where young teenagers, I mean, even my husband, you know, all ages.
Your husband's a teenager?
Not anymore. But you know, seeing men, their willingness to express their feelings, and as you mentioned, you know, what Bing has this ability to pull that out of so many. I mean, not just the men, but Nina as well. And I was just so impressed with that. But I say this all the time. I was also just so impressed with Bing. So I met Bing at a rough cut screening at Gap, and at these screenings, people aren't afraid to say how they feel. Well, someone reminded me, one of the actors, I think, said, "This is a mess." Even, I mean, this is how honest people are. But Bing was just so mature, and this was a few years ago, so he's even younger than now. was just so mature in his answers and had such a clear vision of the film, but yet willing to listen to people and get their input. So I was just impressed with Bing too.
Is there one, you played a great role, in multifaceted role in this film. Is there one aspect of your participation in the film that you feel most proud of, or that you contributed most to the making of the film?
I think just working with Bing and finding our rest of our team to finish the film. One of my favorite parts, but also one of the most difficult parts, was looking for an editor to work with us. So every day, almost every day, Bing and I were watching different films. Remember, we would call each other and say, "This film is great, and we need to check out this editor." But in the doc world, it's a combination of finding editors who are available, and your funding's coming in at the right time, and having the right fit. And also for Bing, since he had edited so much of it himself, it was also a matter of finding someone he could trust and feel like they have the same vision for the film. So we felt so lucky to find this guy who lived in LA, but because of circumstances, we were able to meet with them, and they were able to work together on another project that helped, I think, their relationship grow and see that, yeah, this could work if he was available. And luckily, we had to wait for him, but it was worth waiting for.
I'll get to you in a second, Josh, but Bing, what was it that made you feel like you needed to bring, because you had been cutting for quite a while on the film, and I saw cuts before Josh got involved, and there was a lot of really great work in there. What is it that made you decide you needed to have another editor involved in the process?
I feel like I always knew that we would have to bring someone on. I think at a certain point I felt like I was just editing in circles, and